Poldark was circulating the room and was now bending his head towards Ward. Mrs. Ward began conversation with Demelza Poldark. He be of Scotland, and came to Bolton with designs for a steam pump and 3 shillings in his pocket. He had walked to Birmingham, sleeping in barns on the way. Now, he is the city's most influential businessman. She watched George Walgan watch as Sir Francis approached Poldark. From the group, Miss Frances had nodded and was using the support of her governess to come over to them. "Please, you said the first and last dances, and Mr. Harvey may well get all his investors if you are not prompt." Walgan smiled, and nodded, as if Poldark's arrival compelled a protectiveness in him. "So long as you are sure." "I am sure that if Poldark comes to speak with me I will have a witness to my reply, none other than the host's father." "Good evening, Miss Bassett," the last Jemima said to Frances Bassett, whose governess stood beside her. "Come, sit with me," Frances Bassett asked Jemima. "You may leave us, Eleonora," she added. The woman nodded, and trod the floor to the servant's door. "Your necklace is beautiful," Frances told Jemima, and Jemima reached for the clasp behind her neck and took it off. She handed it to Frances Bassett and the girl held it to the light. "What stone be it, I mean, is it?" "Blue Joan, from Derbyshire. My father bought shares in the mine." The owners at first were not bringing up much of the rock. But then, John Smith, the geologist, visited and explained his idea to them, and they dug where he suggested. A profitable lode was found. The girl was holding Jemima's necklace towards the candlelight. She then looked past the jewel and, handing it back to Jemima, continued, "You were talking very close to George Walgan?" "Mr. Walgan was affording me an opportunity, I believe." "And your other necklace?" Jemima stopped in the process of trying to put the catch back together, then stopped. "This." She brought out the heart-shaped locket, and handed that to Francis, before glancing over to where Dick Trevithick was now dancing with one of his Teague cousins. "A gift, from a friend." "It feels heavier than silver, almost like gold," Francis told her, feeling the weight in her hand. "He did tell me it was a different metal, but did not say what." In the light, the faint engraving played out, a small, tightly looped filigree that traced the shape of the locket. Francis handed that back to her too. "And what of your jewelry?" Jemima asked. But there was a delay in the girl answering and Jemima looked first to Francis's face and then to where she was looking. "Captain Poldark, good evening." Frances Bassett looked from Jemima, who felt her heart sink. "Miss Bassett, my ears withering a broken bar. You were dancing with Mr. Walgan, I noticed." Jemima steeled herself and looked him in the eye. "Surely, it is of no matter to you with whom I dance." "Captain Poldark, we were talking," Francis added. Poldark gave a slow grin. "I do apologize, Miss Bassett. I assumed you would like to talk to someone not about to be sent to court for patent infringement." "If that was so, Captain Poldark, why have you a Cornish engine now installed at Wheelgrace?" His face was fixed still, but his stance changed. Jemima had him. "Miss Withering, my wife still thanks for your cooking lesson." "That was 3 months ago, Captain Poldark." And when she saw behind him Francis Poldark approaching them, she added, "Good evening," to both Ross Poldark and Frances Bassett. She made towards where Dick was chatting to Humphrey and Philippa, pausing to see George's expression as Mistress Elizabeth Poldark entered the room, stopping again as she noticed Dwight Innice, who also clearly had been invited, approach to talk to the woman. But then, before she could get to where Dick and Humphrey were laughing, Innice was beside her. "Good evening, Miss Withering," he said to her. "I trust you had a good Christmas?" "Yes," Jemima replied, factually. Nothing else was needed and she resisted polite detail. "And you went to Wheal Leisure yesterday?" Captain Henchay was pleased the engine didn't have to stop for long. "Yes." Her eye drifted to Miss Bassett, who was engaged in conversation with both Ross and Francis Poldark. "May I just say, your disdain for me, Francis—" "I have no disdain," Jemima interrupted, seeking to get out of the man's company. Why did he have to mention Will Henchay? The evening had been going well up to then. Indifference then, Innice proposed. He should not have attacked you. But, He eyes a broken bar different now. We went to Captain Poldark's trial. A broken bar. Mr. Francis was about to take his own life. Jemima stopped in her search for escape, running in Ice's words through her head again, and looked back to the doctor. And he is better now? He appeared to be when he came to speak to my father and I. From his place beside his cousin at the far end of the room, Francis Poldark turned and nodded to Jemima when he caught her eye. He looked nervous, but happy. Jemima nodded back. What had gone on felt like ancient history. Doctor in ice, Jemima said to him as the doctor made to go. My thanks. He does seem happier than when I saw himself outside Granbler. But you will not console your mind to make it agreeable to Ross Poldark? Shock faded to indignation and then anger as Jemima heard the words. Why should I, sir, when he, and you, have no trust in my word? Indeed, I am having more than a great deal of success with the steam pumping engine and in the minds of Sir Francis. Good day, and took herself back to Miss Bassett, who was once again alone, Ross and Francis Poldark leaving her company and going back to Demelza and Elizabeth. It did not escape her notice that Walgan was also as interested, watching the men in their traverse, and then speak to their wives. Enice joined them, and Jemima felt vindicated. Had he crossed to her to speak for his friend? Make her feel as if she were in the wrong and should accept her own words to be false. That's where she had left it with Poldark and Enice. I am to take over my father's businesses, he having had no son, the girl told Jemima, who took both necklaces out of Jemima's unresisting finger and fastened them back around Jemima's neck. I am unable to leave the house without help, but I can think, I can know, I can learn. I will have my managers. Do you think my father spends a lot of time underground? No, while does the daily work. You don't need to convince me, Jemima told her. My heart is in mining, in the recovery of the ore. How a rock can yield its secrets and have them unpicked by flame and reaction. Rather like a lover, the girl replied. Jemima looked at her face. Why would she say such a strange thing? The girl seemed far too young to think about lovers, let alone lovers unpicking resistive secrets. So when you have my mines, will you work in them? Francis asked her. When I have mine, will you manage them? Only, coal now, a tricky substance. If you are only used to tame tin and homely copper. I meet your challenge, for I will own mines, Miss Withering, and I should dearly like to see a coal mine. May I have this dance, Miss Withering? Came a familiar voice. Jemima looked away from Francis's merry, daring eyes into those of her friend. Before she could answer though, Francis's voice tinkled between them. Ah, Master Trevithick, I am absolutely convinced Miss Withering would love to dance with you. Jemima nodded to Francis Bassett and allowed Dick to take her by the hand. The feeling that the girl's eyes were on her faded slowly as they got to the central part of the hall where the cotillion was beginning to be arranged. Humphrey was standing beside Philippa and across from the Ruth Teague and her husband John Trevornance. Beside Dick, and Jemima's heart began to sink, were Henry and Jane Harvey. I see you wear your locket, Dick told her, as they came together. I wear it. It is precious to me, as you are to me. Jemima said nothing but smiled. He must know she couldn't state her feelings for him, and she saw Dick was wearing his silk necktie that she had bought for him, though it didn't go with what he was wearing. Not that Jemima cared. Humphrey was wearing his too, and the dance passed quickly. On ending, Humphrey encouraged them both outside for some air as Philippa went off to talk to Francis Bassett, one intelligent woman to another. He, Dick and Jemima talked about the move to the Midlands, Edward and Murdoch preparing the ground, Dick told them, and that he had sent his design. When Humphrey went in at the call of more music, Jemima and Dick remained outside in the cool of the night. I have told Darby, and Edward too, that I need you, Dick told her. And I will speak to father, Jemima told him. You believe in the steam locomotive? Do you doubt it? After all this time? Suddenly, Dick took Jemima in his arms. His kiss as firm and hot as it had been the night he had walked her home after the wakes, stirring a sense of her needing him to be exactly where he was, arms around her. She was kissing him back, Jemima remembered, not just being the recipient of his feelings. She wanted the kiss, wanted to feel the want he had for her. Come on. It was Humphrey who broke them apart. and they both looked at the door of Tehiddy House, where Humphrey was calling to them. Jemima. Dick. Another gavotte. He left the door and was over by them, no indication in the least that he had seen them kissing, or unconcerned if they had been. Philippa would like you to ask her, he told Dick. How do you know? She just said. The three of them walked back inside, and Dick duly asked Philippa Giddy to dance the gavotte. They retreated to the doorway, where the heat from the fires were lessened, and pointed at the couples, at dresses, at suits, at boots and hair. She looks like Davis, don't you think? Jemima said to Humphrey as they smiled at the dancing couples. And they chatted about Humphrey's medical round, that he would undertake for Dr. Withering, more nursing and treatment than diagnosis. Oh, but you should come, Jemima. You are good at physic. Has your father taught you? Not really, Jemima told him. I have helped him, of course. He says you will, Humphrey replied, enthusiastically. Now you have some time, now the Ting-Tongs don't need you. Jemima was about to reply, about to tell Humphrey that, indeed, while Ting-Tongs might not need her so much, she had had an offer from George Walgan to go back to wheel leisure again. The Ting-Tongs don't need you? Poldark, who had stepped outside too, had thought of nothing in goading her. But Jemima was too happy to fall to anger. Excuse me, Captain Poldark, I neither sought not asked for your company. She glanced to Humphrey, who looked back to Jemima. Good evening. Jemima nodded, and turned to step inside. Beside her, Humphrey followed, and they stood by the inner hall door, and began to chat again about the dancers. Jemima noticing both Jane Harvey's eyes on Dick and George Walgan's on Francis Poldark's wife. But Ross Poldark was not finished yet, and, as soon as Humphrey had gone to dance once again, Jemima heard voice beside her ear. You look well, tonight. Captain Poldark, my thanks for your compliment to my health. Jemima turned and headed towards the French windows, which she opened, and was about to step through. But Poldark put a hand over hers. Jemima turned, bracing herself for an argument. Thank you for the engine, Poldark told her as she turned to face him. Henshay tells me it has no flaws on it. Jemima's anger was displaced by indignation for a moment. Why should there be? I have made 3 on my own, and assisted on the other 9. What makes you think I couldn't mend yours? It needs a new beam valve, which Captain Henshay knows about, and Jemima pulled her hand away from Ross's grip and shrugged away from him. Why so nasty? I was just asking. But, of course, if you are thinking of heading back to leisure, be told that all the people you knew, he stopped, and shrugged, not there anymore. Why should you think I might care? Jemima pushed on the door. AMD took a step outside. Poldark followed her. Jemima got as far as the hedgerow that led to the formal, capability brown-style garden before the man caught up with her. Are you listening to me? You will be working for George's men, who he appoints. So, what business is that of yours? But the man had taken both of her wrists and had pulled her towards him. It is my business if you are going on to my land, my mine. There is a load of copper there, exactly as I said there was. You, your wife, your employees, Henshay, and yes, even Mr. Walgan would have been better off now, if you had acted when I said, stop. You're hurting me. For Ross Poldark was now squeezing her wrists. Jemima wriggled one away, and managed to swing it towards him, catching him at the side of head. He let go, and she put her arms up in defense as Poldark struck her back. Behind them was a commotion at the scene, and Jemima saw someone stalking past the onlookers in their direction. I would have words with you, were the only words Dick Trevithick, the Cornish wrestling champion, said, before punching Ross Poldark in the face. A broken bar. Then Master Trevithick then carried Captain Poldark down to the stables and hooked him onto one of the horse tacks. Jemima, who was still shaking, heard Humphrey Davy recount the brief version to George Walgan, who had come outside at the common. He stood beside Jemima, who, though not crying, was shaking. She took Humphrey's hand. Then, I am not surprised. When did Ross Poldark ever behave like the gentleman he claims to be? These words were spoken to the world at large and then to Humphrey, who was still beside her. Would you stay here a while, would speak to Master Trevithick. Captain Trevithick was beside his son as George walked over to him, and Jemima hoped that he wasn't about to remonstrate with Dick, who kept looking over to her, his face thunderous. "Don't tell my father he'll never let me work at leisure again now another Poldark has attacked me for nothing." "You have too little faith in Mr. Walgan," Humphrey told her. "He has all but barred Captain Poldark from the place, and replaced the workers there all at Grace now." So it was true, Poldark had decamped to Wheel Grace, not just opened it at the same time. There were shouts from the stables, and servants rushing in the direction of the shouts. Jemima saw George Walgan speaking to Sir Francis at the open door, testing towards Jemima, while over where Dick was, Captain Trevithick was physically restraining his son from his apparent attempt to cross to Jemima. She gave him as best a smile as she could. Behind him, Francis Poldark, and then Mistress Demelza crossed the courtyard towards the stables, Demelza giving Jemima a pained smile. "Master Davy, I have spoken to Sir Francis, and explained I am taking Miss Withering back to her home. You are welcome to come with us, although I know you are escorting Miss Giddy." Humphrey gave Jemima a quick look of question. She nodded, briefly, indicating that this was all right by her, and then said, "I promised to escort Miss Giddy. I see this party is not yet over." But he waited beside Jemima, as the onlookers melted back inside and Dick reluctantly let his father march him away, his eyes on her until Jemima could see them no longer. It was a good mile before Walgan spoke to Jemima, his eyes fixed outside, his way, perhaps, if letting her know his behavior was nothing like that of Poldark's. It wasn't strictly true. Tom Harry had kidnapped her. George had claimed not to know, and she believed him. A more gentlemanly gentleman Jemima had never seen. "That man, he lords over me, his ancient lineage." A broken bar. The words seemed more for Walgan's self, not really for Jemima, and as soon as he said them, he looked at her as if it were the first time he was seeing her. Then he straightened, and nodded to her. We apologize that I allowed you to come to harm you." "You were dancing with Jane Harvey when Humphrey and I were speaking, in a room full of people, Mr. Walgan," Jemima emphasized. "It is not your fault he chose to behave as he did. I am just sorry we did not dance the closing, as you said. I thought it best I took you home." "I agree. I would not have liked to be around when Poldark finally got out of wherever Dick Trevithick threw him." George Walgan smiled. A genuine expression, one Jemima would come to know. How was it that it would only be when it was he or she who were in the very depths of hell that they could find the very thing to say to one another? To be the finest friends two people, better even than the 6 friends she counted at that time, could ever be, even after George discovered the truth for himself. But that wasn't for now. Now, Jemima smiled back, and answered his half-dreamy question. "It seems to me that lineages are just that, every one of the lines had to start somewhere, every man to his own skill. I value merit over birth, Mr. Walgan, as I said before." Jemima felt herself relaxing, and George dipped his head with a smile. "My word, Miss Withering, you are sounding like the revolutionaries over in France." "I hope I do not," Jemima replied, firmly. "A man in power because of his birth had better be a wise one, a skillful one, or everyone suffers." They rode in silence again until the moon shone over Cambourne, like a light left on for one returning home. George Walgan helped her from the carriage and they stood outside Meadowsweet House for a moment. "When we came out this evening, I said I had something I wanted to tell you." "You said ask?" Jemima thought, but nodded instead, not feeling in the mood for further conflict. "Duncan," Walgan continued, "to buy his shares in the boat-building business, sold his wheel leisure shares to me." The moonlight caught his beaming smile. "I am currently majority shareholder. Poldark has cleared out, and I need a mining captain." He nodded to Jemima. "Me?" she exclaimed. "I can't do that. Your mum would not tolerate a woman. Besides, your man, Tom Harry, will be nowhere near you. Of that I promise. And, believe me, Poldark will be out of the place soon enough. He has already taken everything that is not nailed down over to Wheel Grace." "Tell me," George bent his head, "was he unseemly towards you?" "Apart from grabbing me, You mean, he loves you? The steam engineer, George, dipped his head near Jemima's ear. If he hasn't told you, it is clear by his behavior tonight. You still wish to work with him? On the engines? Yes, Jemima replied. Only, he has work in the Midlands, and I think he won't be in Cornwall much next year. So, she added firmly, whatever he feels, he must feel at a distance. Walgan smiled again, then leaned in to kiss Jemima's cheek. Then, whispered near her ear, and, as of tonight, I have arranged finance in order to own all Wheel Leisure shares. It is your mine, Miss Withering, to captain, to survey, to explore and make profit on. If you want it. He stepped back, and stood impassively, as if he had said nothing at all. Mr. Walgan, Jemima restarted the conversation. If I were a man, would you have the same faith in me? No, because I would not have asked you at a party. You would have taken my offer in June at the shareholders' meeting and we would have been further on in our copper extraction. What else could she say? A mine of her own, the mine she knew so well and had been so aggrieved to leave. There was only one thing. Yes, I will, Mr. Walgan, but there is something I need to do which will necessitate travelling to Shropshire, at the proper time. Take the time, when you need it. With Trevithick? Jemima hadn't even told her father yet, or discussed the plans with Dick, even if there was a plan. But she nodded anyway. Can you teach Betty's the engine? You want a Cornish engine? Despite Watt's threats. What can he do? Come and dismantle everyone by hand? No, that's what we pay lawyers for. You are remarkably well informed, Mr. Walgan. It is my business to be. And, I will increase what you were getting at Wheel Leisure as surveyor to reflect your change in rank. You will co-work with Betty's, for he needs to know the geography below grass. Will a day be enough to tie up your business with Sir Francis? Jemima's heart was beating rapidly. Whatever she might have thought Walgan was going to ask her, it wasn't this. Will, sir. And, after tonight, you will never have to see Poldark at that mine. He no longer controls the operations. Jemima held out a hand, and George Walgan shook it. I take that you accept. Jemima nodded. Then, Walgan told her, getting back into the carriage, I will see you at your mine the day after tomorrow.